Say too,
Guys,
and they follow up, ask me how old are they. That's when the grief sinks in.
Oh man, you guys gotta listen to this. This is hard. Trigger warning. Very, very, very hard to listen to. I took a little nap, so that's why I was like, whoa, I'm late. I'm late to do any shows or do anything. Alright, trigger warning. I'm going to back this boat up just a tad bit. I want you guys to kind of hear what her first thing was. So let me pull that down. I'm going to go here. Play.
Unfortunately, my son is no longer here to tell his story, so I'm here to be his voice and tell his story along with all the others sitting in the gallery who have continued to stand by me. Not once have you seen. This day marks the beginning of a traumatic journey defined by manipulation, abuse, and ultimately an unspeakable loss. At 16, I first met the defendant, who was 21 at the time. He proceeded to feed me drugs, alcohol, and took complete advantage of me, which led to the conception of Cory. From day one of my pregnancy...
This is the mom of Cory, who the father, you know... If you guys don't know this story, it was the treadmill one, and... it's horrible. Okay, let's continue.
I knew I would keep Cory, regardless of the way he was conceived. Cory didn't have to be brought into this world, and I knew I owed it to him to bring him into this world with unconditional love. Cory was and still is my life, my world, and my everything. I would also like to speak about my past, which I'm not 100% proud of. You heard a lot about it throughout the trial, and so did a lot of the world. It was very upsetting for that to come out because I've worked extremely hard for many years to be where I am today. I admit I abused drugs, but during the trial it was made out that for some reason my son deserved to be killed because his mom was a drug addict. That is absolutely disgusting. I stand here today, clean and sober, and I know Cory would be so proud of me. Unfortunately, my son is no longer here to tell his story, so I'm here to be his voice and tell his story along with all the others sitting in the gallery who have continued to stand by me. Not once have you seen the defendant shed a tear for Cory in the last 3.5 years since he killed him, and today was fake. I don't believe a word he said, and I don't accept any apologies. He has no remorse for any of the actions he committed. And his only remorse, like you saw today, was for himself because he got caught and convicted. Another reason I could think of is, everything he had done to Cory was done out of spite towards me. Another reason I could think of is he's sick in the head and used Cory as his punching bag. On April 2nd of 2021, was not the first time that he abused Cory, but it was the last time. He never had an ounce of love for Cory.
No,
and to the defendant, Cory was just an inconvenience in his life. He never hugged him. He never praised him. He never told him he was proud of him or that he did a good job. He punished Cory every chance that he could get, and I cannot even begin to imagine what my son dealt with behind closed doors with this man. On April 2nd of 2021, I hesitantly dropped Cory off at the defendant's home, which is a mistake that will haunt me for the rest of my life. I kissed my son goodbye unknowingly for the last time. I wish I knew what was going to happen and I would never let him go. At 3 p.m. the same day, I received a phone call from the defendant where he stated Cory was very sick and he was taking him to the hospital, and then hung up on me after he asked for my insurance card. As an extremely concerned mother, I called him back with no answer and continued to do so along with texts for hours to find out where Cory was and what was going on. For those few hours, my mother and I called every hospital in the area with no luck. The very last hospital finally said he was there. Then there was a knock on the door. It was our local police there to tell me Cory had passed away. My healthy 6-year-old boy who was just alive and well with me a few hours ago is dead. My heart dropped and my whole body collapsed from the shock that took over my whole body. I was unable to breathe. My mind was racing and I felt like I was no longer inside my body. All I remember is screaming that they had the wrong child because Cory was fine this morning. I actually convinced myself that it wasn't him and they had the wrong kid for a while. My next question was, where is Chris? I needed to know what happened, and he was nowhere to be found until the next day.
So how did he go to Tennessee? So in here, she speaks that this motherfucker, I gotta do fair use, I gotta stop, I don't want to get struck or in trouble or whatever the thing is. So you're telling me this motherfucker was able to go to Tennessee the next day after his son died, and you guys took so long to bring charges, and I just... makes me so mad. I put some skincare on today, and I just... This mother just... Her grief is just so... It makes you really think about what could be happening behind closed doors when it comes to these young children. It's just sad.
I found out he was in Tennessee. No one was able to tell me what happened to Cory except Cory died at the hospital. I couldn't even see my son until a week later at his funeral because his body was evidence. But the defendant took away my chance to say goodbye to Cory while he was passing away. And not once did he pick up the phone he was using to converse with many of his girlfriends, to call 911, to seek medical attention, which could have potentially saved Cory's life. Instead, he allowed Cory to suffer silently for hours. Once he realized how bad it was, he threw him in the car and then proceeded to drive 15 minutes to the hospital. He slowly walked Cory into the hospital with no sense of urgency, even when he knew how bad his condition was. I fully believe that if we took Cory to the hospital as soon as he received the lethal blow, he could still be here today. There are many steps he could have taken to save my son's life. Instead, he sat home and let Cory slowly die for hours. Every day since April 2nd has been an absolute living nightmare, and it is now the new reality for me to replay Cory's horrific death repeatedly in my head. It's the first thing I think about when I wake up in the morning, and the last thing I think about before I fall asleep at night. I dread normal conversation with people, because I always get asked, how many kids do you have? I say 2, and they follow up asking me how old are they. That's when the grief sinks in, and I have to tell them my 6-year-old was killed by his father. It is such an indescribable feeling when I found out I was pregnant with my daughter. A sense of guilt was all I could feel. I wanted more kids, but how do I love another child? Is it fair to Cory? That is all I could think about. Now I know this is not true, and I love my daughter with all my heart, but I always will feel an emptiness, no matter how many children I have. My new reality is explaining to my daughter what happened to her big brother and why is he not here. I live in fear every day, every second of the day, that something will happen to my daughter, and I will lose her too. It's a horrible feeling, and it causes me such bad anxiety. I take her to the cemetery to see Cory every weekend, and at 1.5 years old, she knows where Cory is, buried. It is every week. It is heartbreaking. She sits and plays with the cars and toys we left there for him. I live in a nightmare. I would never wish this feeling or how I must live on my worst enemy. Throughout everything he did to Cory, Cory still loved him. He looked up to you. Yeah. And he still wanted to be, I'm sorry. And he still wanted him to be like a real father who treated him like a son. Instead of being a good role model for Cory, he decided to beat him to death. Why? Were you jealous of him? Did you hate me so much that you took it out on Cory? Were you abused as a child? Not that that's a good excuse, because you could have overcome it and became the protector he needed as a child, but instead you became a killer. There was no amount of love in his actions, and only a disturbing amount of hate. It seems like he hated Cory simply because I loved him, and he felt deprived of that love. He couldn't even control himself for long because after the first visit with my son, he started abusing him. My son didn't even know him, and he was beating him. He was abusing him from the first time. I thank God. I hate you for not letting me say goodbye to my son, but I thank God your face is not the last one he saw. I'm sorry. What this monster did was pathetic, disgusting, and I wish him nothing but the worst. One could only hope that karma comes to him quickly. After all he's done, you would hope he'd admit what he's done, but no. Instead of grieving, I had to fight for justice for 3 long years. Go to trial just to relive everything. I had to see that video that I never wanted to see. I didn't have to see it.
And get that man. Can you all see this man? This whole fucking time, he's had his head down. What a fucking ooh. I'm so pissed.
Until 2 weeks before this trial, I went 3 years without seeing it. Oh, I'm sorry. Just for you to be found guilty anyway. What was the point of that? Just to make it worse for us? Are you that crazy that you convinced yourself you didn't do this? I hate you. I will never forgive you. And I'm gonna skip that one. You have stolen my full potential happiness. And I will never have my son back. My family will never feel whole again. My daughter will never get to meet her brother. And my boyfriend will never get to be the father that the defendant should have been to our son. He took my whole world away from me. He has shown and proven to be that special kind of dirtbag he claimed I was. Your Honor, all this monster had to do was say he did not want to be a father. No one would have made him. I would have happily continued to raise my son alone with the help of my family. He had many opportunities not to do this to him. He is in this current situation due to his own actions, and every day he will have to live with this. He deserves nothing less than to experience the pain, suffering, and isolation that he inflicted on Cory.
Yep.
I hope that every moment he's been in prison is haunted by the torment of knowing he killed my child. I fear when Christopher Greger gets out of jail, whenever that is, he will come after my family and I again. I fear for our lives. His twisted mind truly thinks that I caused all this and that he's in jail because of me, even though he's here because he killed him. I truly believe if he ever gets out and gets the opportunity, he will kill me. Your Honor, Cory should be going into 5th grade in September, hanging out with his friends, playing sports and enjoying his life. Instead, he will never experience finding his first girlfriend, graduating high school, falling in love, driving a car, getting married, or having kids. Christopher robbed him of his entire future, and Cory could have easily lived until he was 80 years old. He stole over 70 years from Cory and thousands of memories he could have made. I will never see my son again. I miss him and I love him so much. There are countless reasons Christopher deserves the maximum sentence. He rejected what I considered a generous plea deal, which shows how selfish and ignorant he is as a person. I beg you to not allow this injustice to continue, and he must face the full consequences of his actions. Thank you for allowing me to speak, Your Honor.
Thank you, Congressman.
Let that motherfucker fry.
Ms. Linda.
Your Honor, the state would move for imposition of sentence. I don't know if...
Good. He deserves it. This is his sentencing.
Cory was a beautiful 6-year-old.
My daughter has a letter that my youngest daughter, that she it's too emotional to read, so I'm going to read it, and it's something that I believe in strongly in her words. Your Honor, I am Cory Mitchell's aunt. I am writing this victim impact letter and asking that you give Christopher the maximum sentence possible for the following reasons. To start off, I was very involved in Cory's life from the day he was born, as all of us were. Cory's death at the hands of Chris, a person that was supposed to love him, had left a hole in the hearts of all his family, including myself. I can assure you that Cory was always happy and loved child, up until the day Christopher entered his life. I was there the day Cory was dropped off by Christopher for the very first visit. I remember that Cory went to the room when he got home, and I noticed his lip was swollen. Upon asking him what happened, he told me his father slapped him. This goes to show Chris's intentions from the very first visit. Chris immediately chose to exert power, control, and violence to establish fear in Cory, instead of showing love, caring, established respect between them. During Christopher's visitations, I was often given the painful job of being the one to give Cory to the DCP&P worker. Many times when he showed up, he would hide in the closet and beg not to go, to the point of having a panic attack. He would tell me how scared he was of his dad and to please not make him go. As much as I wanted to tell him he didn't have to go, I didn't have a choice in the matter. Sadly, this continued for the rest of Cory's life, very short life. This is the painful reality of what Cory and my entire family had to deal with every single time he was forced to see Christopher. I think it's only fair that Christopher has to finally face the consequences of his actions.
I wonder if they went and told the CPS worker, like, look, this is, how did it get to this, y'all?
The jury of his peers found him guilty, and I urge you to make him remain in prison for the maximum amount of time possible under the law. Cory didn't have a choice and wasn't shown any mercy. So either should Chris be given a choice or shown any mercy. I'll go on and tell you stories. I could go on and tell you stories about the abuse Cory unfortunately had to endure. I truly hope you heard enough during the course of the trial and will render a significant sentence that forces Chris to understand the magnitude of his actions and deters others from abusing innocent children. Thank you for your time, Cory's aunt, Nicole Mitchell. I just want to add that for me, in the times I spent with Cory, how he was trained to not say anything. because he knew the ramifications. He couldn't tell me that was happening. I wanted him to tell me because I wanted to try to address it. I did try to address it with DCPMP. I made the phone calls, but he was definitely afraid of this guy. And in my short amount of times interacting with Chris, he's definitely got a very bad anger streak in him and a hate streak in him. So like I said, and like she said, please, what he said is not true. He's a very hurtful person. He's very mean. And if he has a chance to do it again, he will do it again. So thank you, sir. Thank you for your comments, sir. Thank you. Just let it.
Your Honor, I believe that Cory's grandmother would also like to address the court.
Ma'am, thank you. Please watch your step.
Cory's grandmother's. Oh, look at him. He knows he's done for it.
And you can either give us your full name or just your initials.
Rebecca Mitchell, Cory Stimon.
Thank you, ma'am.
Your Honor, I want to start by thanking you for allowing me to address you today. I will not stand here and tell you that I forgive this monster, because I don't, and I will never. You'll never hear those words come out of my mouth. The actions of this man have greatly affected my life, the lives of my 2 daughters, my 2 sons, and my granddaughter, and 19,000 others from around the world, including Cory's teachers and doctors. On April 2nd, 2021, this man lost control, and he beat my grandson, and he denied him medical attention for several hours, only taking him to the hospital by car when Cory was within an hour of death, and leaving him to die with only a nurse and hospital staff around him, denying my daughter and myself to be with Cory, and denying Cory the comfort of having people who loved him with him as he took his last breath. This is not a man who should be shown mercy. My daughter slept in my bed many nights since Cory was murdered because she was afraid to be alone. We have nightmares. I see that treadmill video in my nightmares. That video that this monster sat in this courtroom and watched and didn't shed a tear. Not 1 ounce of remorse. I'm being treated for several mental health disorders since Cory was murdered. PTSD, nightmare disorder, depression and anxiety. I'm on several medications to get through the day. I can't work. I'm no longer living, Your Honor. I'm existing. Your Honor, this man took advantage of a 16-year-old child when he was 21. He used alcohol and drugs, and Cory was conceived as a result. Cory was the dirty little secret that Chris never wanted anyone to know about. He demanded an abortion. He met Cory when he came home from the hospital. He knew Cory existed, but hid the truth from his family for years. None of the Gregors wanted Cory. David Greger told me Cory should have been aborted. This man has a long history of alcohol abuse, 2 DUIs, drug abuse, domestic violence resulting in a restraining order, and child abuse that started long before he had visitations with Cory. He abused an ex-girlfriend's son while they were living in the Greger home in Monroe Township. The DCPMP case was closed after the girl moved out of state. The system failed Cory, but Chris Greger and his family also failed Cory. This man has never had to answer for any bad behavior. It seems it always went away somehow. Your Honor, my life will never be the same. Cory was wanted, loved, and doted upon by my family. We enjoyed watching and helping Brianna raise him. I have difficulty going into a store and seeing little boy clothes and toys that Cory would have loved. In September, when everyone is preparing their kids to go back to school, I wonder what backpack or shoes Cory would have chosen. I can't go to my nephew's house for my great-nephew's birthday parties because seeing them makes me sad. Cory should be at those parties. I find myself looking at kids who are the age Cory would have been, and I wonder what Cory would look like now. I cry several times a day. My physical appearance has changed. My health has declined. I've aged. I'm angry, sad, bitter, and mostly I'm broken. This man has shown no remorse as he sat through the trial. I watched every second, and he didn't shed a tear for Cory. He's had discussions with fellow inmates about wanting Brianna to be killed. I'm sure he doesn't think we heard about that, but with social media, things do get out.
Wow,
this is not a man who can be rehabilitated.
So he's back there. Are you fucking kidding me? Did we just hear that right? You gotta be kidding me. I know, Mitty. We just heard it midnight. We heard it, Mitty. We heard it for himself. I didn't see it on any social media sites. I know, baby. I know. It's crazy. So he's sitting in prison and he's plotting against killing his ex-wife. Like, what, you killed the son and that's not good enough for you? You have to... Oh, thank you, baby. Thank you, baby. Hey, I wanted some more Eskimo kisses. Yeah, I wanted some more Eskimo kisses. Mommy's doing sad stuff again. I know I shouldn't do sad stuff in the morning. Okay, let's listen to this, because this is getting good.
My family lives in fear, wondering if he will attempt to have my daughter killed, because we all know what he's capable of. My granddaughter visits her brother's grave and sits on the ground and plays with toys left there for Cory by strangers from all over the world. This makes me so sad, watching Brianna watch her daughter play at Cory's resting place. And Cory wanted a baby sister so bad, and now she's here, but he's not, and Chris Greger is the reason he isn't here. I often wonder what or how we will explain to my granddaughter that Cory isn't here. Do we tell her his father killed him, so then she can wonder if that's what daddies do?
No, don't tell
Your
her
Honor,
that.
Cory also wanted a father, but instead he got this monster who ridiculed him, deprived him of food, love, compassion, and beat him.
And let me tell you what, really quick, I know why people are like, why are you crying so much? Because I can relate to having a very mean dad, okay? I can definitely relate to having a very mean dad. My dad wasn't so good to me when I was a kid. My dad was abusive, always called me fat, and was very mean. If I would get in trouble, he would smack me upside the head. So I can relate to having a piece of shit father.
And abused him daily until his final beating on April 2nd, 2021. Your Honor, Cory knew he was going to die. On the Sunday prior to Cory's death, just 5 days before his death, Cory was at my house and preparing. Cory didn't see the tears in my eyes. Once Cory was dressed, we sat in my bed. Cory looked at me and he said, "Hey, Gma, does God see what my daddy does to me?"
Aww.
I told him God sees
I
everything.
cannot believe there was
His
not
voice
enough
got very low.
evidence for CPS to
He
fucking
said,
come in sooner.
"Why doesn't he help me?"
This is why our children
My heart was
can't
breaking
be
as I
saved.
told him that God was helping someone else who needed him more right now. Cory then asked why his daddy wasn't going to hell. And I replied, "He will someday." That same Sunday, Cory was outside writing with chalk on the sidewalk. Later in the day, Brianna and I noticed that Cory had written, "I died," near our front door. Cory's curiosity about God, heaven, and death grew prior to his death. On April 2nd, when Cory was getting ready to go back to Chris Greger's house, I told him, "Take my cell phone and hide it and call when, not if, when his dad beats him." He said, "Gma, I can't." I told him to run to a neighbor, to which he replied, "I can't," his little face so serious. But Cory knew nobody could help him. He knew he was going to die, and he accepted it. Your Honor, my conversation with Cory 5 days prior to his death and the day of his death will forever haunt me. My family was not allowed to be with Cory as he took his last breath because this man wouldn't tell us where Cory was. We weren't allowed to see Cory after he passed at the hospital because he was now evidence. My 6-year-old grandson was dead and now labeled evidence. This is what I have to live with every single day. Cory was taught in preschool by a lovely teacher, Kristen Oyen, that actions have consequences. Please teach this man that his actions have consequences. On May 1st, 2014, Cory Travis Mitchell was born. I was there holding Brianna's hand, and I was there to cut Cory's umbilical cord. When he was placed in my arms for that very first time, I whispered, "Hi, baby. I'm your grandma. I'll love you and protect you forever." Your Honor, I wasn't able to keep my promise to protect Cory, so I'm begging you to give Chris Greger the harshest punishment possible today. Cory Travis Mitchell loved the solar system. He loved to draw. He loved his
Give
mommy.
this man 70 years to life in prison, or possibly just give him a death row.
Cory wanted a daddy, but instead, he got this monster, Chris Greger. Your Honor, please give Cory justice
But I'm
today.
pretty sure this is out of
Thank you.
Michigan. I think. I can't remember. New Jersey. My bad. New Jersey. New Jersey is this one.
Thank you, Judge. I believe that Cory's
The
mother
other
would
one
also like
is
to
down
address the
below.
court.
Okay, so we heard from the mom already.
You can use your initial, your full name.
Brianna Mitchell.
Thank you. Please have a seat.
Your Honor, my name is Brianna Michello, and I appear before you today not only as a grieving mother, but also an advocate for justice. On behalf of my son, Cory, I stand here before you to plead for justice that Cory rightfully deserves, and to press for the maximum sentence of Christopher Greger, whose actions have inflicted irreparable harm in our lives. For you to fully understand the gravity of the situation, I will flash back to the July of 2013. This day marks the beginning of a traumatic journey defined by manipulation, abuse, and...
I have your letter. I read your letter and your wife's letter.
To be honest with you, I just learned I had the opportunity to speak 5 minutes before we began. I actually would like to read the sentencing letter as it's all factual information and is related to the last year and a half of Cory's life.
So it's questionable whether or not you actually have the right to speak. What I indicated to Mr. Gallucci is my practice typically is to exercise some discretion to allow an immediate family member of a defendant to speak. But I've read every single letter submitted on behalf of the defense, and so and your letter is 8 pages, single-spaced. So I'll be happy to hear some comments from you or some summary of that. But I mean, I can read, sir, and there's no point you reading all 8 pages again for the benefit of whoever. I have it. I've read it thoroughly. So, but again, I'd be happy to hear from you by way of whatever you'd like to add or summarize.
Your Honor, if you don't mind me summarizing on the fly, I think there's factual information that refutes some of what I just heard.
Your Honor, the state's going to object to that. I mean, we're here for a sentencing. The defendant has been convicted by a jury of his peers. Him making, at this point in time in the sentencing, factual discrepancy arguments is not appropriate, and we would object to his comments at this point.
So first let me say that despite all of the information that's been submitted by both sides, I'm not allowed to sentence someone for things that haven't been proven. So while I appreciate people have made various comments about conduct outside the scope of these crimes, I'm just going to place detailed reasons on the record why I'm not permitted to consider certain things. So you may not need to refute the things you need to refute, but I'm going to exercise my discretion and allow you to provide some type of verbal statement to the court that you believe is relevant to sentencing. With the understanding the state can object in the middle of that if it becomes improper.
Thank you, Judge.
I just ask you to perhaps move up a little bit so we can make sure we pick you up on the court's recording system. That's perfect, sir. Yes, sir. Please go ahead. Yeah, that's fine.
So I sat in court for when we were allowed, my wife and I, for every day to be at the hearing. There was a lot of information in terms of Cory's upbringing while he was at the Greger house in Monroe Township. And quite frankly, there were some references today to it that alluded to the fact that he was abused during that time period. At the first visit, which I was a part of, he left with a bloody lip, and he did, from getting a soccer ball in the mouth when he got down to pick up the ball. I think, in all fairness to Chris, despite the fact that we looked at a 12-day time period in terms of determining his guilt, that you look at the holistic life with Cory from the day he entered the Greger household on the first visits to the point where they left and they went to Barneville. I think it's unfair to say that during that time period he was unhappy, he was afraid to go to the Greger house at first when he was doing the visitations. He liked nothing better than to come to our house. He was treated like a king. Many times he was supervised with myself and my wife. His turnaround in school was absolutely incredible. He came to us classified as emotionally disturbed. And part of the reason that we agreed as a family to assist Chris in bringing him to our home was the background that not only Chris had with schooling and dealing with children who had those kinds of disabilities, was because of my involvement with my children and bringing them up to the education system. I listened and I heard about socioeconomic as to why he was doing so well with us in terms of his development, and I think that's just totally unfair. Cory thrived when he was in Monroe in every aspect. His speech improved, his ability to go from classes where he needed constant help to thriving in a general education class to the markedly increase on his grades to his social ability. He joined all types of sports. Chris was actively involved in everything from soccer, basketball, baseball, whatever he could play. Chris fostered. Chris volunteered to coach. To say that he was unhappy and he was abused, it didn't go on for 8 months. He was at our house. And I can say that on behalf of my wife, my other son, and my daughter. So we interacted with him daily. When I hear stories about how he was afraid to come to the house and talk about certain things that Chris did, there are many things he shared with me that I'm sure you don't want to hear in terms of his treatment beyond our house. It's in my letter, and I know you've read it. I also know that you have access to DCP reports. There's a lot of factual information that didn't come out in the trial, and it's a shame. I know you consider, the jury considered only the evidence that was presented. The problem is all this information went out to the media, and only one side went out. You've noticed since day one that my family and I sat back and said nothing. There's much we could say to counter what was being presented here and what was being presented in terms of attacking us on social media. There's so much more to say. I trust that you've read the 8-page letter. I had only hoped that the information in there, and it's all factual information. It's all backed up by going to a police report, a DCP report, statements on the telephone. Everything that I said, there's a piece to back it up. It's evidence. It's not my opinion. It actually happened. The problem is those 8 pages are not read to anyone else. It's going to be up to me and my family subsequent to this to get that information out, because what was presented here is so one-sided. I don't know, and I don't use the word fair or equitable, but in terms of Cory's upbringing and how well he was doing, it wasn't talked about and it wasn't presented, and I think that's a shame.
Thank you for your comments, sir. Are there anything more from the state?
Your Honor, we do have some pictures we would like to show the court regarding Cory. Thank you.
guys. Oh, so sad. This is a tragic. Oh. No marks on him either. You see that? Oh. Wow. So sad, y'all. This little boy did not deserve to have to be abused and unalived. I don't believe that guy's tears.
Thank you, Your Honor. This case is about Cory, and the state would move for imposition of sentence.
So thank you. The record would reflect that the state played a PowerPoint type video presentation of approximately 3 or 4 minutes of certainly non-inflammatory pictures of Cory, many of them appearing to be when he was engaged in certain activities, others appearing to be perhaps some class pictures or school pictures. The court notes that that is specifically permitted under the Victim Rights Act. New Jersey Statute 52:4B-36.1 not only allows the survivors of a homicide victim to to speak at sentencing, but also to present a photograph comprised of a still photograph, a computer-generated presentation, or a video presentation of the victim. And there was no objection. I wanted to place on the record that that is what's occurred, and the pictures were all thoughtful presentations of Cory as a boy up to approximately 6 years of age. I'm going to make a series of findings and review some facts. I appreciate you had your client stand. When I get to the pronouncing sentence, I'll ask him to stand again. So first, there's a pre-sentence report prepared in this matter which the court's required to consider. It confirms that the defendant was found guilty by a jury verdict on May 31, 2024 of Counts 1 and 2 in Indictment 22-07-1332, Count 1 being endangering the welfare of a child, a second-degree crime for events occurring on March 20, 2021, and Count 2, the lesser-included offense of aggravated manslaughter, a first-degree crime for events occurring on April 2nd, 2021. Defendant is now 32 years of age. He reported to the pre-sentence investigator that he's in poor physical health as a result of sports injuries, including a left ankle injury. Those injuries are not particularly relevant for sentencing. Defendant has been able to receive appropriate care in the Ocean County Jail, and the New Jersey Department of Corrections will be able to provide appropriate care for any such injuries. He reports being in good mental health. He graduated Monroe High School in 2010. He attended various colleges, first in Connecticut and then transferring to various other locations.
We're going to skip a
Qualified forensic pathologist with years of experience in a pediatric specialty. Defendant's mother and father wrote very detailed. Endangering the welfare of a child applies to a victim under the age of 18, and this could have happened to someone who was 16 or 17, and therefore, because Cory was 6 and a small child, that makes it worse. But this type of abuse wouldn't have been successful, for lack of a better term, on a 16 or 17-year-old. A 16 or 17-year-old would have been able to run on a treadmill, would have known how to get back on. The abuse on the treadmill is only inflicted because Cory is of that youth. So, aggravating factor 2, that Cory is incapable of resistance because of extreme youth, is again an element of the offense. You can't picture a high school 17-year-old or 16-year-old being put in that situation. You can picture, and we all pictured, and we saw it at length, Cory being put in that situation because of his youth and his father's ability to control him. There's no audio in the treadmill video, but obviously Cory's getting back on the treadmill, not voluntarily, and then towards the last two falls, Cory's picked up by his father and put back on the treadmill. So those are elements of the offense, and as much as I would like to say, yes, they're present, they're not legally sustainable, and all I'd be asking for is an appellate court to tell us they're not legally sustainable. So I can't find aggravating factors 1 or 2 because the offenses include that. The same is true with respect to the aggravated manslaughter offense. Not only did the state have to prove the defendant caused Cory's death recklessly, the state had to prove the defendant did so under circumstances manifesting extreme indifference to human life. Again, in the jury instructions, I advised the jury of what that means, that the state had to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant acted under circumstances manifesting extreme indifference to human life. And that phrase does not focus on the defendant's state of mind, but rather on the circumstances under which he acted. In light of all the evidence, the jury had to find beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant's conduct resulted in a probability of death as opposed to a mere possibility of death. And if so, the jury could then find, as it did, that the defendant acted under circumstances manifesting extreme indifference to the value of human life. So, therefore, on the aggravated manslaughter charge, I can't say I'm going to double count and it was extremely heinous and cruel, because extremely heinous and cruel is an example of conduct manifesting extreme indifference to human life. And one of the reasons it's extremely indifferent is because it was perpetrated on a 6-year-old, 60-pound boy who obviously wasn't capable of resistance. So for those reasons, I respectfully disagree with the argument that I could find those factors. I can find aggravating factor 3 that the defendant is likely to commit a new offense. Based upon the defendant's disorderly persons offense record, based upon the defendant's attempt to influence his mother's testimony, which caused defense counsel to then forego calling his mother as a witness. His mother had testified at pretrial hearings before this court outside the presence of the jury. After one of those hearings, defendant, speaking to his mother on a recorded line from the Ocean County Jail, engaged in attempts which the state portrayed as attempting to influence or tamper with her testimony. The parties came in the next day outside the presence of the jury, or the next court day, and brought that to my attention, submitted a transcript to me, and the parties also indicated that the actual recording is worse than a reading of the cold transcript. I'm permitted to consider that because that was evidence on this record and shows someone who, even in the course of the trial, with extremely effective and experienced criminal defense counsel, was still trying to undermine the criminal justice process. I'm also permitted to consider defendant's attempts to flee the jurisdiction after Cory's death on April 2nd, 2021. He did not simply leave the hospital and drive to, say, a relative's house or some other location close by. Defendant drove all the way to Arkansas. I don't know, and I didn't allow an answer to the question of whether I was on the way to Mexico, because that would have been speculation, but he was, by Detective Sergeant Raymond Cole's testimony, 45 minutes from the Texas border. Never once in this case has anyone submitted there were any relatives in Texas or in Arkansas, but the behavior was, in an understatement, peculiar at least. This was not a defendant that left and went a few miles away. It's true the defendant did turn around at some point. His father testified at his father's urging to come back, likely because it made him look guilty, and it certainly did make him look guilty. I'm also entitled to consider, as aggravating factor 3, that the defendant committed these two separate acts on separate dates, that the treadmill video shows a callous display of the defendant towards Cory. In addition, despite a long prison sentence, the defendant can still commit new crimes while incarcerated. Someone who's violent, who lacks impulse control, who's motivated by anger, can reoffend while in a correctional setting against corrections officers, civilian correction staff, medical staff, or other inmates.
Wow.
Particularly if another person is vulnerable, incapable of resistance. But it's worth describing some other aspects of the treadmill video. We will, of course, focus on Cory's repeated falls on the video, what can be really described as the child being ejected off the video, almost like on a conveyor belt. And I remember the reaction from the jurors when they first saw it. They sucked in their breath when they saw that. And then you see Cory getting back on and it happening again and again. In fact, even before the first fall, you see this young man get on a treadmill and run like he's a champion. I can't imagine a 6-year-old who was able to do that. I was so surprised by it. He obviously knows how to use that treadmill. And then he's doing a great job for several minutes while his father is working out in the gym, doing various exercises. And then his father comes over and starts to increase the speed and perhaps the incline. And Cory tries to keep up. And when you're looking, you keep hoping that, okay, it's only going to be for a short sprint. But it just keeps going. And you see on the tread, Cory falling further and further behind. Defenders will walk around behind him to grab him. And you see finally he can't keep up. And then to everyone's horror, you see what happens as it goes on 5 more times. Mr. Gallucci described that to the jury in his opening statement as horrifying. Told the jury they were going to find it horrifying. And that was obviously strategic to try and minimize the impact of it. But because it is so horrifying, what do we kind of discount in the rest of that video? It's actually 4 separate videos, but the totality of the circumstances from when Cory arrives at the apartment complex and goes into the gym with his father till he leaves. You see Cory being brought into the parking lot substantial period of time. So I'm required to give some weight to that factor because the defendant has no felony level convictions in this area of the state, no indictable crimes in this area of the state. He has one ordinance violation and the one drug paraphernalia that I just talked about. So while not perfect, it's certainly not a serious record. Despite everything that everyone has said about arrests in other states, it's a little difficult to accept that if someone's arrested multiple times in all these jurisdictions, that no prosecuting attorney chose to file charges, or if they did, they were very quickly dismissed. So the speculation that this defendant has a serious record is just unfounded. I'm confident that the prosecutor's office would have submitted to me records of convictions if they existed anywhere. I mean, there are times I get records of convictions from Puerto Rico, and it takes the prosecutor's office a great deal of time and effort to get those. So here we have a series of police reports, which I can't consider. They're mostly one-sided hearsay anyway, but I'm not permitted under the case law to consider those. So I have to recognize some weight because of the reasons I just articulated about no free crimes. Defendant is 32 years of age. Absent some unusual medical event for a young person, he will eventually be released to his own liberty. He will eventually be a free man to walk around. Cory, of course, will not. So this is not the functional equivalent of a life sentence, despite the imposition of a consecutive sentence. It's also fair and just, given some of the testimony by Dr. Andrew, who testified in great detail about this, got down off the witness stand, went to the large screen TV and pointed out the bruising all over Cory's body, and testified about the injuries and bruising of different ages in different levels of healing, demonstrating the doctor's concern about ongoing abuse. We had pretrial hearings about this. The state encountered up through the date of incidents back from a shrub into the tree. I did not allow them in, but Dr. Andrew, kids get bumps and bruises. The consecutive sentence is overall fair under the circumstances of this case. The state's taken an additional position that I should impose the least restrictive or flat prison sentence first, such that it precedes the more restrictive prison sentence, meaning that the defendant should serve the endangering sentence before the aggravated manslaughter sentence. There's a very difficult legal analysis associated with that. I rely upon State versus L. The Supreme Court opinion in State legally runs afoul of certain sentencing guidelines, and it may interfere with the expertise of the parole board in determining when a defendant should be released on parole. And based upon both of those decisions, I conclude that I cannot impose the least restrictive sentence first without engaging in an abuse of discretion. So therefore, I direct that the No Early Release Act sentence on the aggravated manslaughter count run first, followed by the flat sentence on the endangering count, such that the aggregate sentence is 25 years, and if the jail credit of 885 days comes off the aggregate sentence. Another condition of the No Early Release Act is that the defendant shall serve a 5-year period of parole supervision upon release, that he shall provide a DNA sample and pay for the cost of the same. There are 2 $50 victim of crime compensation assessments, 2 $75 safe neighborhood assessments, 1 $30 law enforcement training and equipment fee. The superintending institution where defendants incarcerated will draw sufficient monies in an amount not to exceed 1/3 of the inmate's total income that may be required to pay these assessments. The Office of the Victim of Crime Compensation Board submitted a request for restitution for funeral expenses. There's been testimony during the course of the case about whether or not defendant's parents paid for funeral expenses, whether or not the Ms. Mitchell's family paid for them through the VCCO office. I've considered, I'm supposed to hold a hearing on that, and I conclude that the parties need closure in this matter. They don't need another hearing on whether or not those expenses actually went to the funeral, and the VCCO letters also refers to some other expenses not associated with the funeral that may not be directly attributable to defendant's conduct. If these were out-of-pocket expenses by anyone qualifying as a victim, I'd be inclined to consider them further. The Office of the Victim of Crime Compensation Board exists for the benefit of victims. It charges, if the defendants are assessed, like this defendant's been assessed, 2 penalties for that, to fund that, and I conclude at this point that it's not appropriate to order that restitution because of the questions concerning who paid for the funeral, and more importantly, I would have to do an analysis of the defendant's ability to pay now or in the future. He's been incarcerated for the last 885 days, he's been unemployed, he clearly has no ability to pay now, and he has little ability to pay for the next 25 years. So I conclude, for those reasons, that mitigating factor 6 is not present, there's no restitution to be paid, no ability to pay restitution, therefore I do not order restitution. If there's any bail in this matter, it's discharged, there are no dismissals. Madam Clerk, is there anything else I need to address? And Mr. Glutz, we get an appeal rights form? All right, anything further from counsel?
No,
Thank you everyone for your excellent presentations, that concludes the matter.
Thank you.
So we're going to get 25 years.
Wait, the back row's gonna exit first.
Oh, so the father faces up to 40 years in prison. Was found guilty, aggravated. So I think he got 25 years, guys.
State alleges that defendant puts up 2 fingers to say you're 2 hours late, and that's your punishment. I don't know if that's accurate.
25 years.
Without engaging in an abuse of discretion. So therefore, for all the foregoing reasons, I conclude the imposition of a consecutive sentence is overall fair under the circumstances of this case. The state's taken an additional position that I should impose.
I think he got 25,
because you rarely see a child
I'll look
essentially
into
put
it.
his
I'll
arm on
let you
himself
guys
in the
know.
beginning until his father
All
starts to put
right,
him back
have a
on
great
it.
day.
So